Chapter 10. "Oh, I love it," Lisa said when she crossed into the room late into the afternoon. "Look at all these colors." "Yeah, they kind of blended together," Eve said, stepping back to examine the last part of the wall. "It's kind of a rainbow effect, huh?" "It's great." One more print, and Eve stepped back for good. She had taken a shower before they ate lunch. AJ was taking one now. Jeff had done his best to get him to take one earlier, but AJ said that helping wasn't helping if you found every excuse you could to get out of it. Granted, he would probably have to use turpentine to get the paint off of himself after all this time, but Eve hadn't minded painting the whole afternoon with Bozo the Clown. "You don't look half bad either," Lisa said, walking over to her friend who had opted to keep her jeans, but traded in her baby blue paint shirt for a cleaner one of Lisa's. However, she did notice that Lisa's shirt wasn't exactly new. Practical, Eve thought. Smart and very practical. Just like Lisa herself. "Too bad I couldn't keep those blue streaks, huh?" Eve said, running her fingers through her damp hair. "What a fashion statement." "Yeah, then everybody would be having paint fights." "Sorry about that," Eve said. "It got a little out of hand." "Oh, really? I didn't notice." "Well, considering you had a hand in setting it up, I'm thinking you should have." Lisa looked at her serious but worried. "We didn't, I swear." "Yeah, right." "I swear, Jeff about had a heart attack when you were here this morning. He figured you'd think we were trying to set you up, but honestly, we weren't. He told AJ, and I told you, and, well, it just kind of happened." Although she knew it was setting a dangerous precedent, Eve really couldn't be mad at her friends, even if they had set up the day by dubious means. "Okay, but don't let it happen again." "I promise. I'll warn you next time." Their own clothes were in plastic bags when Eve and AJ stepped out into the late December afternoon. He had borrowed a pair of light blue jeans and a light gray t-shirt from Jeff, and Eve was still in Lisa's shirt. Lisa and Jeff had begged for them to stay, but after cleaning up the mess, they really didn't feel like intruding any longer. "So, what did you think?" Eve asked, looking at him as they walked slowly to the cars. "It's cool, all those colors mixing together. It's like a new pattern everywhere you look." "Yeah," she said thoughtfully. "You know, I think that's why I don't have a favorite color." His gaze jumped to her face incredulously. "You don't?" "No, I just really like it when they can all fade and blend and work together to make something really awesome." He smiled. "Yeah, forget conventional." "Exactly," she said as they stopped at her car. She turned and leaned against the door, then she laughed when she caught sight of the blue paint flecks still in his hair. "You missed some." Carefully, she reached over to his hair as he watched her hand. She pulled a piece out and showed it to him. "I'll probably be finding them for the next year." "You? I washed this stuff 4 times and there's still streaks in it." She ran a set of fingers through her hair. "Tell you what, how about I make it up to you?" She dropped the hair and looked at him skeptically. "That sounds scary." "No, seriously. How about this? I can pick up a couple movies, you order pizza, and we'll all meet at your place, say, 45 minutes or so?" "Canadian bacon?" she asked. He smiled at her. "Your choice." "And who gets the prize for best timing in the whole world?" Eve asked as she carried the pizza not to the dining room table, which was in clear view of the television, but rather to the center of the living room floor between the 2 recliners. "Me, of course," AJ said, popping one of the movies into the player. "What did you get anyway?" Eve asked as she opened the box lid and breathed in the heavenly scent of fresh pizza. "Mission Impossible." "Cool." She pulled one slice out for herself and pushed the box across the floor to him when he sat down next to the other recliner. He hit the remote button. Nope, no previews. Ugh, hate previews. Without really looking, he grabbed a piece and pulled it out of the box. Eve was too busy eating to really care what they were watching. As long as it wasn't horror, she could deal with it. "Ah," AJ said, sinking back against the recliner footrest as he took his first bite. "This was a good idea." "Yes, it was," Eve said wholeheartedly. My white knight saves the day once again. His gaze traced over to hers. You're so lucky. Yes, I am. And then we watched movies till like midnight, Eve said Monday evening when Lisa called, wanting all the details. And? Lisa asked leadingly. And what? Eve mimicked. And then he left. Well, did you kiss him? Did he kiss you? Did you, sit in the same chair at the scary parts or something? Did he really leave at midnight? Come on, Eve, I'm dying here. No, and yes, Eve said with a laugh. Lisa growled. It was supposed to be yes, and no. Eve shook her head slowly. It's not like that, Lise. I'm telling you it's not. He's a nice guy, a wonderful guy. He's funny and sweet, and I have a lot of fun when he's around. But it's not like we're going to rip each other's clothes off every time we see each other or anything. Well, did you at least make another date? Are you going to see each other again sometime? Not unless somebody sets me up without telling me again, Eve said warningly. I didn't? Oh, no, of course you didn't. And Jeff had no idea either. Give up the innocent act. You are so busted. We really didn't plan that. Yeah, and you would be mortified if it happened again, right? Well, it's not like you're helping things along. There are no things to help along. I'm telling you, there is nothing going on between AJ and me. We're friends. Besides, he's 5 years younger than me anyway. So, there's no rule that says you have to be the same age. And he's not the most stable person in the world either. Did you know he packed up and moved to LA to be a drummer? It could be worse. He could have not come back. Lisa. Eve, Lisa said, managing to stretch the single syllable into two. Look, you dumped Dante because he was all love, marriage, family. Why can't you have some fun with AJ, who's not focused on all of that? That's just it. I am having fun. But I'm not going to push things into something that's going to make us both miserable. Why would it make you miserable? Because things are nice just like they are right now. Well, what if it doesn't make you miserable? What if it makes you happy? Eve pushed that question away from her heart as she looked up onto the center of the mantel. Just don't push it, okay, Lisa? If things work, they work. If they don't, I really want to have him as a friend. Lisa said nothing. Okay, Eve asked again. Okay, Lisa finally said reluctantly. And tell that husband of yours the same goes for him. The "you may not set us up under any circumstances" plan lasted until 2 days before New Year's. Don't tell me you already have plans, because I know you don't, Lisa said when the subject of their party came up. And don't tell me this isn't a setup, because I know it is, Eve retorted. It's a party, Eve. Lots of people have them on New Year's. Yeah, and I'm sure no one who lives in your house just happened to think up this brilliant party idea as an excuse. It's a party, Eve. Oh yeah? Who's going to be at this party? Just some friends, work friends, people. One people in particular, whose name just happens to start with A and end with J? It's a party. We're inviting people, lots of different people. How many people? 10, 20, I don't know, something like that. So, it's not just going to be the 4 of us, conveniently dwindled to the 2 of us? It's a party, Eve. The good news was, it was indeed a party. The bad news was, Eve only knew about 6 people there. She couldn't be positive that was planned, but it looked mighty suspicious. Hey, Eve, Gabe said, holding out a hand to her when she walked in the front door. Happy New Year's. Hey, she said, happy to see someone that she knew. She angled her way over to them. Wow, Ashley said, appraising Eve's straight black cocktail dress with a spaghetti strap top. You won't have any trouble catching flies with that outfit. Nope, no fly catching for me tonight, Eve said, smiling. I'm just here to have some fun." "Here's an extra Smirnoff I got for Ash," Gabe said, holding a bottle out to Eve. "But she wimped out after one. She's my designated driver." "Oh, no thanks," Eve said quickly. "I'm my own designated driver tonight." Gabe shook his head slowly. "You two are way too kind to all those poor, pathetic slobs who have to be out working all the wrecks tonight." "I think I'd like to stay in one piece if that's okay." He shrugged and set the bottle back behind him. "Suit yourself." "Hey, what are we standing around here for?" Ashley asked. "This is a party, remember?" It had been a long day at work. AJ hated the holidays. The only thing worse would have been drawing the short straw and having to work that night. Not only was it the worst night of the year to work, he really wanted to go to the party at Jeff's. He had fought with his hair for an hour, but finally gave up and grabbed one of his black ball caps. It didn't look too bad with a black and gray diagonal shirt, although it made him look a good 6 years younger than he wanted to. Oh well, tonight the fantasy would come crashing down anyway. There was no way that Eve would show up dateless, and the fact that he hadn't gotten up the guts to call her to ask her to go out with him pretty much solidified the fact that they wouldn't be together tonight. As he climbed into the Civic, his mind traced back over his time with her, and he couldn't help but smile. For as prim and proper as she looked on the outside, there was a life force inside her just waiting to jump out. It wasn't hard to see, unless they were with someone else, and then she retreated back into her who everyone else seemed to think she should be shell. In fact, he had fallen for that lie at first, too, until he watched her throw popcorn in the air and giggle with joy when she caught one, or when she sat on the floor to eat pizza, or when she was covered with blue paint and seemed not to mind at all. No, she was not the same person that she showed the world, but he was sure the glimpses he'd had of her would not be on view tonight. When he pulled up to the party, it was nearly 11:30. Had it not been New Year's Eve, he might not have even bothered to come. Well, that and her, he thought as he raced up the sidewalk to the front door. He rang the doorbell and turned to look out at the assembled cars. The only one he really cared about was a little shiny silver one. However, before he located it, the door swung open. "AJ," Jeff said, happily swinging a hand up to catch AJ's. "You made it. Sorry I'm late." "Just in time," Jeff said. Eve was beginning to regret her little speech to Lisa. Okay, so she didn't like the idea of being set up. But she was beginning to think she didn't like the idea of not being set up either. Her gaze jumped to every person who walked through that little entrance arch, and had it not been for Ashley and Gabe, who managed to include her in every conversation, she might have just sat and stared at the opening all night. "My parents have this cabin out in New Mexico," Ashley said. "We wanted to go for Christmas, but somebody had to work." "I'm telling you, win the lottery and I'll gladly quit," Gabe said seriously. "Anyway, we're wanting to get up there in January, maybe over the long weekend. The snow's perfect this time of year." "Oh, I bet it's gorgeous," Eve said, drifting away on the thought. "I haven't been skiing since—" Her gaze dropped to her cup. "It's been a long time." When she looked back up, Ashley's gaze was soft and sad. "Hey, why don't you come with us?" Eve's eyebrows arched skeptically. "No, I mean, we already asked Jeff and Lisa, and they're in, but of course Lisa can't ski. It'd be fun to have somebody else to ski with, other than the guys. Come on, Eve, it'll be fun." "Oh, well, I really—" "Just say yes, and come. You know you want to," Ashley coaxed. "Well, okay, but—" "Hey, look who the cat dragged in," Gabe said, noticing the doorway. Eve's gaze jumped to the door, and with one slam, her heart stopped. "Hey, AJ, over here," Gabe called. She watched him walk across the room like it was some dream that couldn't possibly be real. No one should look that good. But for as good as his clothes were, the best part of his whole outfit was the smile in his eyes. "Hey, all," AJ said, catching Gabe's hand in the air as Gabe stood. "Well, you can still stand. That's a good sign, and you don't even look too plastered yet." "I'm getting there," Gabe said, raising his glass. He wobbled slightly. Yeah, I can tell. AJ glanced past Gabe at Ashley and smiled. Hey, Ash, how's it going? Hey, she said warmly. Then his gaze floated over onto Eve, and he smiled softly, but said nothing. Eve, Gabe said, leaning toward AJ. Her name is Eve. Yeah, AJ said as a smile exploded onto his face. Seems like I remember that. Here, Ashley said, scooting away from Eve. Have a sit down. Oh, okay, AJ said, but he hesitated as if he was unsure she would want him anywhere around her. Mesmerized, but still partially conscious, Eve scooted the other way to make room for him. When he sat down on the edge of the couch, her breathing joined her heart in thudding to a stop. The shimmering gray material gracing his arm only inches away called to her hand, but she held one hand with the other and dared not let them move. You ever been skiing? Ashley asked AJ, resuming their conversation without missing a beat. A couple times. He leaned back into the couch. Some buddies of mine talked me into going to Breckenridge once. It was great. But if you ever get a chance to night ski at Keystone when it's 10 below, skip it. Night skiing? Gabe asked in trepidation. Isn't that a little dangerous? No, it's not too bad, unless you lose track of the trails with lights, AJ said. Ashley laughed. Extreme sports, huh? Yeah, like extremely stupid. Well, if you can ski with the lights off, can you ski with the sunshine out? Gabe asked. I'm not too bad, AJ said. Why? Who's going skiing? Us and Lisa and Jeff, Ashley said. But we're looking for a few to round out the trip. Cool. When? We were thinking over the long weekend in January. Count me in, AJ said without hesitation. I'd love the chance to eat up some black diamonds again. Fab. Then it's just the 6 of us, Ashley said. Eve wanted to protest, but she was having trouble breathing normally. 6? AJ asked, stopping on the number. Who else is going? Eve, Gabe said as if that should be obvious. She's our designated driver. Isn't that right, Eve? He raised his glass to her just as AJ turned to look at her, cowering into the couch and feeling her cheeks turn rosy. If she made a sound, she didn't know if it would signal confirmation or negation. Oh, cool, AJ said, although he didn't sound at all thrilled. Okay, we've only got 5 minutes, Lisa called to the room as she poured champagne for each guest. Everybody get your glass. Wishing her life made any sense, Eve reached for her glass of water and drank the rest of it. And Gabe, Lisa said, pouring him some, and Ashley, and, oh, AJ, you made it. Yeah, a little bit ago, he said awkwardly. Oh, and Eve, Lisa said a little too loud for Eve's senses. Couldn't the world just overlook the little fact that he was now sitting by her? It wasn't like she'd planned this or anything. Then again, it wasn't like she planned anything in her life anymore. Jeff turned up the television as the ball in Times Square began its slow descent. 10, everyone in the room said right together. 9, 8, 7, 6. Eve looked around, and for all the happiness of being with her friends that should have been surrounding her at that moment, all she could feel was utter loneliness at the absence of the one who wasn't there. 1, she said softly, and she looked at the champagne in her glass. She should have just stayed home. This moment would have been much easier where she could have cried in peace. Happy New Year! The partygoers yelled, and the noise was deafening. If she could have disappeared right into the couch cushions, she would have. The very moment of the anniversary of the first time Dustin kissed her. The thought tore through her and left her staring at the pale gold liquid in her glass. She had been so happy at that moment, so sure it would last forever. But it hadn't lasted forever. It hadn't lasted even a sliver of forever. I wouldn't drink it either, AJ said, leaning closer to her. He wrinkled his nose in disgust. Jeff's as good at picking out good champagne as he is at painting. Eve looked at him numbly and tried to smile. I guess you're an expert at champagne now, too? Yep, Champagne and rescuing nearly airborne boxes, my specialties. The middle of her heart dove right over that balcony as her soul crumpled over itself. I'll be back. With that, she jumped to her feet and pushed through the revelers, fighting to find the back door before she broke down completely. Concern ripped through AJ like a machete. He hadn't meant to make her cry, and yet just before she jumped up, he had seen the tears. He stood and set his drink on the table. "What's the matter with—" Gabe started. "Excuse me," AJ said, rushing past them and following her. He paid no attention to the curious stares he got on the way to the door that led out to the little back patio. Just as he got to the back door, he met up with a bewildered-looking Jeff and Lisa, who stood in the kitchen, looking at the door that had just slammed shut. "I'll get her," AJ said, pushing past Lisa, who started for the door. She stopped and then retreated back to Jeff's side. When he pushed through the door and saw the outline of Eve standing there in the darkness, head down, shoulders slumped, AJ took a breath and asked for the right words. Quietly, he let the door swing back closed, and he shut it for good measure. Slowly, he walked over to where she stood by the little white railing. When he was only a couple inches away, he stopped and took one more breath. "It's got to be hard sometimes," he said softly. She sniffed. "What?" "Trying to get through these things like it's not killing you." Her head fell forward even farther. "I know," he continued. "I remember Christmas the year after my dad left. Mom put up a brave front and everything, but it was still hard. I remember sitting there under the tree with all my presents, just watching the door and waiting for him to walk in. Somehow I kept thinking if I just waited long enough, he'd be there, you know?" AJ's breathing constricted around the words. It was the first time he had thought about that morning in years. I'd always loved Christmas until that year, but it just wasn't any fun anymore. It hurt too much. 1 inch at a time, she turned to look at him, and tears glinted on her lashes. "New Year's Eve was the first night he kissed me," she said softly. "It was more of a dare than anything. He was there, I was there. We weren't there together. We just happened to be talking when the clock struck midnight. But his friends started giving him a hard time about it, like it was New Year's and he was sitting there not kissing anybody. You wouldn't have thought Dustin was shy, but he looked so scared I thought he might seriously be sick." She laughed at the memory. Then her face crumpled into it. "But the second he kissed me, I knew." "That's so amazing to me," AJ said as his soul absorbed the story. "I mean, it's almost like fate just turned the page or something." Her gaze snagged on his questioningly. "One minute you're all happy to be on your own, and the next minute, wham, it hits you that things will never be the same." A soft smile traced over his features. "Dustin was a very lucky guy." She looked down at the champagne in her glass. "It's just so hard to believe that this year he'll have already been gone for 2 years. Where does the time go? I sit there sometimes and I think there's no way I'm going to make it through the next minute. Then all of a sudden it's been an hour, and then a day, and then a year, and then I wonder sometimes if one day I'm just going to wake up and it's been so long that I've forgotten." AJ shook his head. "Not possible." "I read these books, you know, and they all say the same thing, that eventually you have to let go of the hurt. But I don't think I want to do that. If I do, I might forget him altogether." It was then that he reached one hand over and cupped it across her back. "How many times have you relived that moment?" "A million," she said without questioning which moment. "Every minute of every day I relive it. I don't think a day's gone by that I haven't wondered what I could have done to make it turn out differently. If I just would have been there, if I just hadn't left. If I just hadn't listened to him and gone to Dallas, then maybe at least that morning when he left, he would have kissed me on the cheek, trying not to wake me up, and I would have pulled him back into bed, and he would have told me that he needed to get to work and how late he was going to be, and I would have laughed and told him he could go if he wanted. But I wasn't even there when he left, and now I'll never have another one of those mornings." As her tears overflowed their banks, AJ took her in his arms gently. Her grief slid down her cheeks, making her sniff rather than breathe. "And how many times have you relived the good moments? Not because you regretted them, but because of how wonderful they were?" he asked after a long moment. She sniffed twice and backed away from him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dustin lived more than that one day. Surely there are a lot of days you remember that are about him living, rather than about him dying." However, her features were still baffled by the statement. Gently, AJ continued. "Like, what did he like to call you?" She smiled at the thought. "Mrs. Knox. It sounds like an old lady name, but he loved saying that. To begin with, I got mad at him, but then I figured out he wasn't going to stop, so—" "And what was his favorite color?" At that, she outright laughed. "Anything but pink. Even I stopped wearing it after a while. He always said it made him dizzy, and I figured he was dizzy enough as it was." "Why?" "Well, he was always doing this stuff, sneaking up on me while I made supper, twirling me around for no reason, pulling me up out of chairs so I had to sit on his lap. He just always seemed to be having such a good time. I figured it was safer if I didn't push him right over the edge." She stopped, adrift in the memories. "Have those times gotten lost?" AJ asked, tilting his head so he could look in her eyes. Slowly, she looked down, spun the liquid in her cup, and took a small sip. "Yeah, I guess they have." "He wouldn't want you to be miserable forever, you know." "No, he wouldn't." Her gaze caught his. "Are you telling me I have a choice?" "What do you think?" She smiled at him teasingly. "You always have a choice, whether you make it or you let it make itself." Her soft smile lit the corners of his heart. "And what is it that you're going to choose?" She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Then she took her champagne and tossed it out onto the lawn. "Not that stuff. Black. That's awful." He laughed. "Should we go back in and see if they have something a little less awful?" His hand came up in offering to hers. She looked down at it and smiled as she placed her hand in his. "Lead the way." As they sat on the couch long after most of the partygoers had left, the moments just after midnight slipped away from Eve. Peace had overtaken the sadness, and tranquility was now at the center of her heart. AJ's hand hadn't left hers since they'd come back in, but that didn't feel frightening or awkward, just really, really nice. "We're thinking about flying to Albuquerque and renting a couple of cars," Ashley said as the six of them sat in the living room. No one was in the mood to clean the debris scattered around them. "It's only a couple of hours away from the cabin." Jeff looked at Lisa with concern. "Are you going to be able to fly?" 4 days, she said with a nod. Then she looked at Ashley. "If you wait till the next weekend, I'm grounded." "Then we have to make it that weekend," Gabe said, as though his was the final word. "I can get your tickets Friday if you're serious," Ashley said. Lisa looked at Jeff. "I think we're in." Ashley's gaze turned to AJ, who didn't appear to even be listening as he sat next to Eve, who really wasn't. "How about you guys?" Ashley asked. AJ's head dropped to the side, and he looked at Eve questioningly. She looked at him and thought for only a moment. Then she smiled. "Yeah, we're in." Their hands never let go until they got to the little silver car. Jeff hadn't even made his "you take care of her" speech, nor had he so much as grilled Eve about calling the second she got home. They simply said goodnight and "see you in 2 weeks," and then they closed the door. Gabe and Ashley said goodbye at the curb, and Eve noticed how AJ waited to make sure that Ashley was driving. Then they walked to her car and stood in the halo of the streetlight. "Thanks for tonight," Eve said, letting go of his hand and wrapping her arms around herself. She really needed to start being more sensible about what season she chose to wear certain outfits. "No, thank you." He pulled her into his arms and held her for a long moment. "You going to be okay getting home?" "I didn't drink the champagne, remember?" He laughed as his one hand rubbed across her back. "Yeah, seems like I remember that part." Then he backed up slightly and gazed into her eyes. "But you're all right?" "Yeah," she said, ducking her head and then lifting it to meet his gaze again. "I'm all right." For one minuscule instant, she thought he was going to kiss her. His eyes said he was. His body said he was. But then, at the last possible second, he smiled and backed away. "I'll follow you?" She couldn't have stopped the smile. "You'd better." When AJ waved to Eve as she crossed off the freeway onto her exit, he wondered about the sanity of letting himself fall for her. The fact that she wasn't over Dustin yet was abundantly clear. What was not clear was whether she ever would be. He thought back to that night that seemed so long ago, and the images were right there in front of him. "This suit has got to go," the other paramedic had said as he hooked up the IVs and fought to stabilize the lifeless figure lying face down on the gurney. The acrid smell of seared skin and plastic filled the air, and the motion of the vehicle under his feet swayed. "Hey, keep it steady up there. This is hard enough as it is. Get that suit off." The cold metal of the scissors wrapped around his fingers as AJ started at one tear and worked as quickly as he could to remove the strips of charred firesuit that still clung to the figure. At that moment, as he fought to maintain his balance despite the overwhelming attack on his senses, all he could think about was Jeff, sitting in the front of the ambulance, dazed, frightened, and overwhelmed with worry about his friend. At that moment, there was no way AJ could have pictured her sitting somewhere in a faraway hotel, having no idea how her whole life was about to change. Slowly, the scissors worked until the right side of the suit had fallen away, revealing deep red wounds that seemed to not even be flesh. Wailing. He remembered the wailing of the siren, and only now did he know that's how her heart sounded the moment she had heard the news. "It's not coming off," he said to the other paramedic who was busy filling a syringe. "Don't pull it!" The words still echoed through his head. "You'll make it worse. If it comes off, let it." Instantly, he watched as his hands let the crunchy material fuse back to the wound that was oozing blood. He did his best to find places that would just come off, but there weren't many. "Cripes, how much farther?" the other paramedic had asked. "We're going to lose him before we even get there." 9 minutes. The next day, AJ had driven back to the scene and timed it. 9 minutes from the front door of the apartment building to the emergency door of the hospital, and yet it had felt like a lifetime. AJ's senses came back to the reality of the freeway, and for a moment, nothing looked familiar. Then, suddenly, he realized why. He had missed his turn some 15 minutes before. Shaking his head to force it back to the here and now, he pulled onto the exit and made the U under the bridge. "How many times have you relived that moment?" some deep part of him asked. Tears clouded his vision as he pulled back onto the freeway. "A million," he said to the darkness around him. This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.